intimate and sexual life is not only of primary interest for people, it's a primary driver of everything that we do. It's a driver of how we connect with others, why we connect with others, our behaviors in a daily life, how we structure our societies and individual life. It's a driver of technological innovation. It is going to become paramount if we want to become an interplanetary species. It's at the heart of everything that we do and everything that we are. So not taking sexology into consideration in, for example, technological development and space exploration, it's kind of like saying, well, let's do all of these amazing things, but without humans.
The greatest threat to democracy in 2024 was disinformation. And that 95% of the elections that took place globally were impacted by disinformation.
We have young kids who are engaging in conversations with these AI chatbots and falling in love with them or becoming best friends with them is because they don't know where the line is between real and fake.
Every single technology that I could think about moves us deeper into our isolated selves and out of our communities.
We're going back to the moon, we're pushing towards Mars, we're sending people for science, for exploration, and the impact that these environments can have on our sexual health are so understudied.
Every major innovation has forced us to redefine what it means to be human. The more advanced technology becomes, the more valuable human capacity becomes.
Frankenstein, Ex Machina, HAL 2001. These are classic stories in the collective psyche of our species, and now we are living through this story. It's not to say we've already built Frankenstein. It's to say that no one knows if it is. That is the truth.
Welcome to a new season of Purposeful Empathy, a show dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. This season, we're exploring empathy in the era of AI. Together with my expert guests, we dive into the impact of artificial intelligence on democracy, human sexuality, our attention, consciousness, and so much more. You don't want to miss a single episode, so hit that subscribe button now. And if you like what you hear, post a comment and share the show. Hi there. There's a lot of noise about AI right now. Predictions, promises, lots of warnings, and it's so hard to make sense of things. I've spent the past 15 years studying empathy, and what I want to know is how will AI impact how we treat one another? So I decided to sit down and speak with a variety of AI experts, and the result is this 25-part series exploring how artificial intelligence will reshape our society and our relationships. And there's a ton at stake, so I do hope you'll join me on this learning journey. Today, my guest is Dr. Simon Dubé, a research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and affiliate professor of sexology at the University du Québec at Montréal, whose work explores sex tech, Erobotics, AI intimacy, and what it means to design technologies that remain compatible with human flourishing. In this conversation, we explore why sexology may become one of the most important and overlooked fields in the age of AI, what happens psychologically when humans form emotional and intimate bonds with AI systems, why conversations about sex, intimacy, reproduction, and human relationships are becoming essential to our shared future, and whether AI intimacy technologies might deepen empathy and human connection or slowly replace them. If you want to understand how AI and sex tech are transforming intimacy and what it means to be human, this show is for you.
So welcome to the show, Simon. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
I am committed to completing 25 conversations with people who have expertise in artificial intelligence across a wide variety of topics. And when I came across your profile, I thought, oh, now here's one that I really am excited to chit chat about. And then I discovered you were on The Daily Show. We're going to include that for viewers to watch too. But before we get into all of this wonderful stuff about sex in space, I would like to just ask a little bit about you. So you're a research fellow at the Kinsey Institute. You're chief of innovation and development at the Advanced Space Life Research Institute. You're also an affiliate professor in the Department of Sexology at the Université de Québec à Montréal. And you specialize in sex tech, erobotics, and space sexology, all of which sits at the intersection of psychology and human behavior, AI, and responsible innovation. So I'm excited to explore what it means to design technologies that remain deeply compatible with human beings and connection that I think, and a sense of belonging that we all want. But first, I think it would be nice if viewers and listeners could get to know you a little bit besides the bio, and maybe a little bit about what got you to where you are today and the work you're so passionate about.
Yeah, I think, the journey really started. I've never gone back this far, I think, in time, but I think the journey really started in CEGEP here in Montreal. It's in between high school and university, for those who don't know. But I was in this class in psychology, and I won't name any names, but the substitute teacher was teaching that class this semester was terrible. It was terrible. It was a terrible class. So what I did, I skipped class for most of the semester, and I just started reading the book. And I absolutely fell in love with psychology. I decided to do my bachelor's during that time. I fell in love also again with research, more specifically working in labs in psychophysiology. Decided that I wanted to continue and do my PhD. But I kind of needed to, I think, pick a topic that would keep me motivated for a long period of time. So for those who know what grad school is like, it's a lot of time, a lot of years, a lot of sacrifice, and it's tough to stay motivated on long periods of time on these topics. So I needed really to get into something that I think would keep me interested. And when I was searching for different labs, I discovered that there was research here in Montreal on the neuroscience and cognition of human sexuality. Started reading on it, and it's just, again, it's always a story of love. I always kind of fall in love with these topics and these ideas, and I get super motivated about them. So jumped into it, started researching preferences, development of sexual preferences, started with BDSM and psychophysiological responses to sexual stimuli. But rapidly, with everything that was happening with technology, I just, again, realized, look, this is going to transform every aspect of human intimacy, sexuality, and reproduction. I need to understand it. Started my thesis working on sex robots and artificial partners. And with my colleague, Dr. Devantil, we started this field, Erobotics. He's the one who actually coined the term, and we popularized it with our original paper, Foundations of Erobotics, to try to structure the research around human-machine interactions and sexology. So we started there with the theoretical work, but rapidly moved to empirical research on the biopsychosocial factors that would influence people's willingness to engage with or through technologies in the intimate sphere. And during that time, in the middle of the PhD, as one does, I kind of started thinking about some of the applications of these technologies, and I woke up one morning realizing these technology could have real potential for people who are in extreme isolated or remote environments. And what is more extreme, isolated, and remote than space? So the light bulb again kind of clicked and says, maybe some of this tech could be used to meet the needs of astronauts. So we wrote some papers, position papers about this, rapidly realized that there was interest in the topic, but also, most importantly, it was completely understudied. So we kind of took a step back because we were already providing solutions when some of the baseline work was still missing. Wrote some theoretical papers, as one does, some position papers, and then moved to empirical research now. So we've run the first study at the intersection exploring mental health, sexual functioning, and team dynamics with the world's biggest analog in 2025. So still writing the papers, but it should be submitted soon. So again, yeah, to make a short story very long, that's how I got into this. And yeah, I don't know. Is there details? I can also give details about some fun facts about myself, but
Please do. I love fun facts.
yeah. Well, fun fact number one that I don't talk to a lot of it, but I think it makes sense for people, anyone who's listening to this, to realize that I like writing science fiction. That as both science and science fiction have kind of inspired, obviously, some of my work and my way of approaching some of these questions. And I do that, like some people play music, some people, I don't know, paint. Well, on vacation, I like to write about these things just for myself, and for not for particular publication and stuff like that. And another fun fact that I think I've said to a few people, and I've gotten some interesting reactions. That's why I'm saying it today, is the fact that I run regularly with headphones, but rather than listening to music, I listen to movies. It's a list of movies that I've watched so many times in my life that I know what's happening. So I run while listening to movies. No image, just the sound of what's happening.
So maybe you recognize Pete Hegseth speaking the Pulp Fiction. Okay, anyways, we won't go into politics. Well, it's great to have you on the show, and there's so much I want to ask. I guess right out of the gates, since Artemis 2 happened like less than 2 months ago, to your knowledge, nobody's had sex in space yet.
No, not officially. Either
Okay.
no one's speaking, either it never happened. But I think the bottom line is that it's not because it's not happened yet that it won't. There's a very good chance that eventually it will happen, or it will actually become necessary for all kinds of reasons. So yeah, I think at some point someone's going to talk about it and officially declare it, and it's not going to be as big of a deal. It'll make probably headlines for a week, and people will be like, "Oh yeah, we knew." But in the meantime, no. The official message is no.
So that frontier is yet to be broken. Okay, so listen, let's get serious. Sexology, as I know, because I just did a little research to be prepared for this conversation, is the interdisciplinary study of human sexuality, including sexual behavior, relationships, intimacy, identity, desire, attraction, pleasure, reproduction, and sexual health. So it's the whole kit and caboodle. Why is it important to know or to study, to discuss sexology now? Why is it important now?
Yeah, that's a huge question. But I would just start by saying how that it is fundamental to human existence and everything that we do. Our intimate and sexual life is not only of primary interest for people, it's a primary driver of everything that we do. It's a driver of how we connect with others, why we connect with others, our behaviors in a daily life, how we structure our societies and individual life. It's a driver of technological innovation. And technological innovation then in turns kind of influences how we express our sexuality. It is going to become paramount if we want to become an interplanetary species. It's at the heart of everything that we do and everything that we are. So not taking sexology into consideration in, for example, technological development and space exploration is kind of like saying, well, let's do all of these amazing things, but without humans.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I'm listening to you answer that question. I'm like, well, you are here thanks to sex. I am here thanks to sex. All of us are, right? So, okay. You co-authored a journal article entitled Sexual Health in Space. And I want to read just a couple of paragraphs from the abstract and have you comment on what you believe are some of the most salient findings from the research you did. Quote, the combined efforts of national and private space organizations are progressively allowing more people to live and work in space. But to perform long-term space flights and become a multiplanetary species, we must address the intimate and sexual needs of humans. Yet research on space sexology remains limited and fragmented. To move forward, this 5-year scoping review consolidates the current research on sexual health in space. So you looked at 50 publications were identified, including empirical, theoretical, and review articles and other scholarly works, such as book chapters and commentary. And most of the research comes from biology, with contributions from philosophy, ethics, law, gynecology, obstetrics, aerospace medicine, gender studies, and sexology. So you're at the earliest of stages if you found 50. It's not like there's 5 million research studies out there. So what did you find?
Lots. And first of all, when I was listening to you reading, I'm like, wow, this is really quality content. Shout out to my colleague again, Maria Santaguida, who co-authored that paper with me. So it's really a work of love of both of us, not just myself. But we found plenty of very interesting things. Yeah, it was 50 articles, but it was on a span of, again, 5 years. There is a longer period of time. We've been studying aspects of reproduction and reproductive health in space since the 60s, mostly in non-human animal models, whether that's amphibians, fish, rodents. So there's a relatively long history of research on reproduction in space, but it's mostly from the deep bio side. It's about how radiations and microgravity are impacting our reproductive cells, our tissues, our development, the embryo development, the viability of offspring, the potential for example, rodents to then reproduce after being exposed to space-like or space conditions, how it impacts ovas and sperms and just gametes in general. So there's a few things that are really important out of, I would say, this review. The first one is that 50 publications over 5 years that are actually also in great part review papers and theory and if yes, a few empirical research, mostly with non-human animal models, is not a lot. Is really not a lot, and definitely not enough compared to where we are at this point in time going into space and with our space history, but especially this new age of space exploration where we're going back to the moon, we're pushing towards Mars, we're sending people for science, for exploration, and for commercial reasons for longer and longer periods of time beyond Earth's atmosphere. It's really not enough. That's such an important component of human life, and the impact that these environments can have on our sexual health are so understudied. So that's the first important message, I would say, of that paper. The second, I would say, is in the composition of the research that structures this field as of now. It's progressing. Since that review came out, there's a few other papers that came out, and more people like me and researchers like me are moving towards empirical work. So stay tuned. There's additional research coming out your way, but as of now, most of the research in this field is dominated by biology. And that's important. I'm not disputing that at all. Quite the contrary, we need more bioscience related research to sexuality and reproductive health. But sexuality is not just about producing viable offspring. And even having viable offspring is not just about reproduction. It's about the interpersonal dynamics. It's about how expressing our sexuality and sexual identities are important in our overall health and well-being, and how we work together and function together as a society. So it's important to consider all the biopsychosocial aspects of human sexuality when we deal with the reality of us and going into space for longer periods of time. So not a lot of research, but most of it concentrated on the biological aspects, especially non-human animal models. We need to be moving towards human studies about more than how radiations and and microgravity or hypergravity affects our tissues. It's not enough. It's important, but it's definitely not enough. And the third, I think, really important takeaway of this paper is a lot of this research is theoretical, and a lot of this research is also kind of trying to pull information from different fields and trying to make best guess about how it's going to impact our sexual and reproductive health in space. It's not enough. We are past reviews, we're past theoretical work. The time is now for actual empirical work. And the good news is there's more and more ways to run this kind of research. There's a huge boom in the opportunities to run what we call research in analog environments. So environments that simulate key aspects of space life, and more opportunities also to run actually research in space environments. With the advent of scientific and commercial space station, we will be able to send more and more people in these kinds of environments and see how it influences interpersonal dynamics and mental health and sexual health. Yeah.
So I'm just curious, and I want to continue having a very productive conversation. So this is a critical question that just brewed in the back of my mind. I'm imagining somebody might say, holy smokes, a lot of energy and resources might be going towards this. How come it can't just go towards the people who are having reproductive health issues on planet Earth at the moment? So I don't know, how do you address that critique?
Yeah, there's so many good reasons why we're going into space. But yes, it takes a lot of resources, but people not always realize that a lot of the innovations that we have in the medical sector, in the technological sector, as well as in the health sector, came from the tremendous amount of resources that were injected actually in space programs for research. So I think in many cases, people don't realize, but often it's two birds with one stone. It's like it advances space life sciences, but it advances at the same time the sciences that it provides some of the data that we then need and can apply in the in Earth environments and conditions. When it comes to sexual and reproductive health, I mean, space gives us an opportunity to better understand, for example, how radiations affect sexual health, and how we can also try to mitigate some of these effects. On the interpersonal level, there's a really important bidirectional relationship between space environments and Earth environments. Space is tough. Space is trying to kill you. Space is very, very difficult environment to operate in. But if you want to think about it this way, we're all living through our own little space and analog missions. We're living stress. We are sometimes in remote distance from our loved ones. Sometimes pandemic happens and we're stuck in small environments with our family. We live through some of the hardships that astronauts and people who take part in these space missions are facing. The difference often that we see is that in space environments, you don't have space for errors. And the stakes are so high that it magnifies the impact of these environments. So it allows us to actually study some of the interpersonal dynamics that happen in these stressful kinds of environments, and we can then learn from to become better erotic beings here on Earth. So a lot of the research that we do already on Earth related to human sexuality in our labs, the kind of research that Maria and I do on other aspects of our research is still happening and still important. But space gives us an opportunity to explore other aspects that might be more difficult, but still very useful, also to learn more about, to help people live better, intimate, and sexual lives.
Beautiful. I love that. So you can sleep well at night. I'm happy for that. All right. So you mentioned that the term erobotics was coined by, I think, your supervisor, your advisor, your thesis advisor?
My friend and colleague. We've been working, Dr. Devontil. Yeah.
Beautiful. And that is the study of human-machine erotic interaction. Is that correct? So
Absolutely.
Okay, so can you walk us through what that actually means in plain language? What are we talking about when we're forming intimate connections with AI or robots? Like what is that exactly?
Yeah, that's absolutely part of it. So Erobotics is a portmanteau for two concepts, eros, so everything has to do with intimacy, sexuality, sensuality, and even friendships, and bot or botics, which has to do with agents. So technologies that might be able to act in or on the world to influence, to have an impact on our intimate and sexual life. So together they form a field that is at the intersection of human-machine interaction and sexology, which were two solitudes for a certain period of time. So we try to really unify them. And this field is really dedicated to studying everything that has to do with our interaction and coevolution with technology on the intimate and sexual fronts. So it studies everything that has to do with the ethical and social considerations of these technologies, from their impact on our intimate and sexual lives at the individual and societal levels. And most importantly, it's also trying to, I would say, influence the development of these technologies so that we develop what we call beneficial erotic machines. So machines that mitigate risks and improve human well-being. So it has, hopefully, this field has the objective also to make sure that we integrate technology in a harmonious way into our intimate and sexual life. So it includes, yes, obviously our relationship with artificial partners like sex robots, virtual partners, chatbots, like that people are more and more using. But it also includes everything that has to do with virtual reality, extended reality, teledildonics, or connected sexual toys, digital intimacy, like webcams. So everything that has to do with the intersection of sexuality and technology.
And in general, okay, so I know maybe this is going to be a hard question to answer, but do you believe with all that is evolving right now in real time that it's going to be a net positive for humanity?
Net positive in the sense that it is going to bring a little bit more good than it is going to bring more problem. It's hard. It's really hard to say. It's really hard to say. I think it's going to bring both and neither at the same time, and that we're just trying to do our best to integrate it into a meaningful and positive way and shape it into a direction that can potentially improve people's intimate and sexual lives. I think we're sitting on a tremendous opportunity because these technologies, they can help with education, with research, with therapy, with pleasure and access to pleasures in general. But at the same time, the way some of these technologies are being deployed with capitalistic objectives, so developed by technologies to maximize engagement and profit, not necessarily aligned with human well-being, is an issue. It's a huge problem. And we're playing catch up because researchers have been calling for more research and regulations on some of these fields for years, and we waited up until we crossed that line in 2022 with ChatGPT and so the likes of it. We waited up until it was a iPhone moment. We waited up until the technology was there being deployed on large scale with tremendous individual and collective impact before reacting. So it's very difficult. I think there's a huge potential for people to learn more about themselves, become better erotic individuals through learning and integrating some of these technologies in a both technologically enhanced and technology-mediated environment, but also as partners, complementary partners in our intimate development and lives, and to form what I like to call erotic multi-agent systems, where you have relationships with humans, you have relationships with artificial partners, you have relationship potentially with artificial partners of your partners, of human partners, and together we evolve and form our intimacy and sexuality in a meaningful way through that. I think that's progressively where we're going. Whether it's going to be a net pod, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stop you here because this is where it's starting to get really juicy for me, because I'm going to out myself as somebody who is, I'm a bit of a technological Luddite. Okay, I'm not an early adopter. I'm a late adopter. And years ago, I did a TEDx talk and I talked about technology and the impact that it's going to have on human beings. The opening of the story was, I teach at McGill University, and maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, they had a big meeting with 200 faculty members across the entire university ecosystem to talk about where the university needed to be 50 years from now. Like, let's try to envision 50 years from now, like how will the university stay relevant? What would we need to be doing to meet the needs of the students and the world? And to put us in the mood to be thinking about the future. So remember, this is 10 years ago. This team of, a very multidisciplinary team rolled out a table with a computer, and then a hologram came out. And one of the people sat in front of it and started talking and telling them a sad story. And then we watched the hologram say, "So what I'm hearing you say is," like almost like what a therapist would say. And you could literally feel the room split into two. There was like this gasp of like, "Oh my God, it's so awesome." And then the other half that I belonged to was, "Oh my God, what is this? What are they talking about?" Right? So I said, how can a bunch of lines of code and a pixelated face meet the needs of humans? Okay, that's where I landed when I saw that. Then later on in my talk, I actually speak about sex specifically and how there's a movement towards, human beings having sex with non-human beings. And what are the social implications of that going to be? And when I project out, I don't think it looks very good. So when I ask you the question, you're like, "I don't know, we don't know, we don't know." I'd love for you to give me a sense of where you think we're not going to fall off a cliff. Like, you've just hinted at a few things, right? That maybe we would become better lovers. I don't know. I want to understand what the possible positives are of this connection between machines and humans.
Starting there, because usually I'm getting asked like, what's the dystopia looks like? First of all, it's not going to be either a dystopia or utopia. We have to just remove this. It's not going to be the end of the world and end of relationship between humans, and it's not going to be this amazing awakening of human sexuality and exploration. It's probably going to fall somewhere in between, especially with what we've seen with other technologies, whether that's pornography, phones, toys. Some people develop problematic behaviors with them in small fractions. Most people just integrate it or not in their life, and a few also find ways to benefit tremendously from these technologies. So I'm glad you're asking about the positive, because I often have to explain all the risks and dangers. But when it comes to the positive, I like to really break them into 4 categories: education, research, therapy and medical clinical applications, and pleasure. So when it comes to education, some of these technologies could really help democratize comprehensive sex ed. Some of these systems can be trained on very reliable or as reliable as we can provide them in terms of sources. They can be coached by educators, by therapists. They can be vetted, and they can be deployed on a large scale to try to inform at different stages of people's life. They can be a source of to answer questions, to guide people through certain reflections about their sexuality and gender identity. Compared to what you could potentially do in a classroom, you can potentially also practice your sexuality with some of these technologies. Discover your body, discover what feels good, discover what doesn't feel good, and try to, I would say, just kind of explore in a safe setting with a relatively controlled partner some of what sexuality could be. It could teach you about mutuality, about consent. It can also, very importantly, explain to you, look, there's things that you can do with a machine and an artificial partners. There's things that you must and shouldn't do potentially with a human. It's important to kind of that the technology explains some of these distinctions and differences. At the research level, which is really important, some of these technology gives us an amazing amount of control over the standardized stimuli that we can use. So one of the challenges that people don't realize necessarily when you do human sex research is that you're quite limited when it comes to certain ethical and methodological tools and process that you can use. We cannot, at least at this point in time, we cannot bring people into the lab to have sex with strangers, and then measures like Masters and Johnson used to do with heart rate and EG. And there's ways to kind of do it with solitary masturbation. We have to show sometimes pornography in terms of stimuli to get sexual arousal. Also, it's very difficult to test new clinical tools in research settings because you cannot necessarily bring in people, have sex. They don't necessarily have a partner. They cannot practice with a partner. So there's plenty of ethical, methodological challenges that happen in sexology that actually calls into questions a lot of the science sometimes that we get out of laboratory. It's not very ecologically valid. In some ways. So potentially some of these artificial partners and technologies, they can at least bring us to a higher level of ecological validity to create actual partners that you can interact with and gather data from. And most importantly, with new AI technologies, we can create stimuli, whether in virtual environments or on just still images or videos, that we can really manipulate variables in a very, very precise way. And we can also adapt the stimuli to the preferences or the needs of the participants and clinical populations that we have potentially in laboratory settings. So very, very neat, net positive to learn more about human sexuality. So that's the kind of work that we do at UCAM. When it comes to therapy and clinical application, I was kind of hinting to it towards like clinical style research, but people don't realize necessarily, but if you have a physical or mental health or sexual health conditions, it might be very important to do certain processes. For example, progressive exposure. If you have sexual aversion or if you have been a victim of trauma, it might be important to use certain devices or technologies to regain control over your sexuality or be exposed to sexual stimuli in a progressive manner to then regain control over your body and sexuality. Technology can help, once again, in that front, creating adapted, scalable, and progressive stimuli that are more and more interactive so that people can, so that we can help evaluate and treat certain clinical populations. And finally, pleasure. People assume that pleasure is equitably distributed in the population. That's just not the case. A lot of the critics that we have against some of these artificial partners and technologies, first of all, a lot of people are using them much more than we can possibly imagine. But also, a lot of these criticisms often come from a very privileged position. People who have access to intimate partners, people who don't have necessarily sexual difficulties, who form relationship necessarily very easily. But there's plenty of people who have physical or mental health condition or sexual difficulties meeting and finding partners. There's people who don't want human partners because they prefer technologies, or also because they've lived through very traumatic experiences. Some people at certain stages of their life don't necessarily want to be in a relationship with another human. Think, for example, I just came out of a heartbreak, or I just got divorced. I'm not interested in going out there. I'm not interested in meeting another human and dealing with the messiness or just sharing that intimacy with someone. I still have needs. I still have a desire to experience pleasure and sexuality in my daily life. These technologies are there for that. Think about elderly people who spend their life 80 years, 60 years with their partners. They don't want to, some of them, yes, want a relationship with another human. Others just want to have friends and don't want to have their sexuality with anyone else. They want to continue just living their life in a controlled, potentially more controlled environments. And related to elderly people, but also other populations, people who have cognitive difficulties might not be able to consent or might be a danger for themselves or to others. What do we do? All of these populations, all of these individuals in these conversations, they get thrown out of the discussion when people are like, well, these technologies are going to ruin people's life. They're going to be isolating, super addictive, and they're going to just be all agreeable. But potentially, they forget that there's a huge complementarity and some populations that might really benefit from them.
Well, see, so this is what I'm coming to understand through all of these interviews. The reason that I was motivated to have these interviews with AI experts for me to really reflect on, so my domain is empathy. I care deeply about human relationships and our capacity to empathize with one another. And I was like, I need to understand what I think might happen to empathy as a result of AI sort of becoming ever more ubiquitous in our lives, and now like in space, really ubiquitous. So I think I've come to realize that the model, and you referred to this earlier, of capitalism and short-term, returns is driving a lot of the innovation. But we need to have a counterbalance of engaged citizens and researchers and people who are advocating for the pro-social use of AI. Because if in the absence of that, it'll all go to pot, right? So I'm appreciating how you're shedding a light on certain populations that are at disadvantage, and how it could be very helpful to people across a wide variety of segments of people. So thank you for that. I think I want to do a follow-up question though. I'm including myself in this. One of the deepest fears people have about AI intimacy is that it replaces real human connection. And you've suggested that the relationship is more complicated than that. You speak of co-evolution, which is, I don't know. When I read it, I'm like, the EBGBs. And then when I listen to you speak, I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds not so bad. So I wonder if you could speak to what you believe AI can teach us about relationships, intimacy, emotional connection, and empathy.
Well, first of all, I think it's already teaching us a lot about empathy. It's teaching a lot about what certain individuals and what we value collectively. Some of these systems, people start to use them. They find them very impressive. They find them very supportive. But also, they ultimately then transition and find them empty, and they kind of also re-actualize or I don't know how to say this, but it actually revalues also relationships with humans. And I think when it comes to particularly empathy, we can think about what we're more and more finding, which is, I'm not exactly sure if it'll stay that way for a long period of time, but it is that way right now, at least on the scientific level, the data that we're gathering when it comes to the AI empathy paradox. So there's a few studies that came out recently that suggest, for example, that people find that AIs, in this particular case, large language models, are better at expressing empathy and so understanding people's cognitions and feelings, and effective in showing this in an empathic manner than humans. Still, people still prefer empathy that is expressed by another human. Why is that? Why is it that a technology that is potentially objectively better at expressing on a technical level empathy is better than human? Why do we still prefer the empathy that is maybe better expressed by other human being? I think it's that particular question is at the heart of a lot of the things that are happening right now. I think, personally, it is showing that there's two aspects. There's the projection of shared humanness, and there's free will that are coming into play in this particular AI human empathy expression paradox. In some ways, we're projecting two things. We're projecting that the AI doesn't have shared humanity, doesn't have the shared feeling, the shared biology, the shared experience that we're expressing. So we're projecting that it potentially doesn't have a cognition, is not sentient, doesn't have feeling, and definitely if it does, it's not human. It's something alien that we have trouble understanding. But on the other side, on top of it, there's no free will. What I think we value also in humans is that we choose each other and we make choices that we think are out of our free will. We choose to express empathy. We choose to care for one another. We choose to make an effort to understand what someone is thinking and feeling and trying to act accordingly. That effort that we're doing as value. We attribute a lot of value to that shared humanness and that effort that we make, even if it's not perfect, even if it's messy, it's not the right word, it's not the right tone, it's not the right behavior. We do still attribute value to just trying to be good for one another. That is going to be very difficult to replace. I don't think it's going to get replaced. That doesn't mean AI doesn't provide some additional value. AI can help you express emotion that you might not be ready to share with other people. It can help make sense of your feeling. It's very good at understanding what you're feeling, what you're seeing, and then try to organize it and express it in a way that you're like, oh, yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to say, and then use those words and try to explain to another human potentially how you're feeling. So many people now are confiding in ChatGPTs and the likes of it and trying to make sense of their reality through these technology. I think that's a net positive in general, because we're not so good at that baseline. We don't have necessarily the resources to make sense of how we're feeling and how to behave with it. And if a technology can help us make sense of the world, I think we are in generally better good for it. And not everyone has a person to help us be there and listen to us and make sense of these things. So that's part of it. I'll stop there, but I can continue also on coevolution as well, because it's another.
Well, okay,
it's another.
I do want to come to coevolution. I also want to come to agency, but what you conjure up for me is, even as somebody who's not an early adopter of technology, I got very curious after an argument with my mom to basically describe what the argument was like as objectively as I could. And then I asked it to do an analysis from a trauma-informed, high empathic perspective. It did an analysis from both perspectives and then offered to write letters to each other. So when I read my letter to my mom, I was like, oh my God, my mom would love to receive the letter like this. And then when I read the letter from my mom to me, I was like, oh my God, wouldn't I love to hear these words from my mom? So I really do understand the value and why people are turning to it. I guess I just worry about the tipping point. I've been exposed to conversations where people who study existential risk are looking at AI as the 2.0. So if social media was the 1.0, AI is the 2.0. And they're worried about an entire generation growing up, developing close relationships with their AI chatbot at home, not just for help me out with schoolwork, but help me out with life. And that, I don't know how many kids love spending time with their parents and turning to them for like whatever advice, but they'll almost be like an intimacy with this machine that can't love the child back and doesn't have necessarily the best interests of the child at heart the way a maternal or a paternal love would do. And that there's that little bit of gray area, like, oh, well, what happens if an entire generation across the world grows up without the closeness of, the parental bond? So that's what came up as I was listening to you speak. You feel free to respond, and then of course we could move to the next topic.
Yeah, during my defense thesis, I was asked by a professor straight up, do you think that Erobots, artificial erotic agents, could benefit everyone? And I took a deep breath and I said, yes. And I defended that point and my thesis and my defense. And I'll redo it right now. I think people tend to look at the impact of technology in a very linear way. Technology impacts life rather than life and us design the technology to fit our needs and try to create an harmonious integration. A truly beneficial machine would actually understand the individual, its context, its needs, its relationships with other humans, and what it can benefit. It would understand that a child actually needs to spend time with its friends, with its family, with its parents, with loved ones. A truly beneficial technology would actually realize that in the loop, in the interaction loop that it's having with the users, it's potentially, for example, spending too much time on it, or it's not necessarily developing necessary skills. It's just asking for answers. Not good, not enough. A truly beneficial partners that is integrated in people's life and that we should be developing and deploying and thinking about would actually, for example, realize that, okay, the child is asking a lot of questions about their identity, their relationship with friends, their feelings and stuff like that. It would help guide and make sense of these feelings like a therapist would, but also would give recommendations and encourage the user to actually go out and solve their problems and interact with others and potentially be like, look, you've spent already 30 minutes with me. If we take a very simple example of overuse and excessive use, you spend 30 minutes with me. I've explained this. You got this. You have this. Now it's time to go and practice it. Tell me later potentially how it went, and we can continue in that process. But a truly beneficial tutor or technology that integrates harmoniously in our life actually takes into account what is ultimately good and beneficial for people's intimate life and encourage them to seek their path with while remaining a bit uncertain about what these needs are. So we're very inspired by Stuart Russell's principles about creating uncertain AIs that not only learn and try to optimize particular specific goals. That's a problem. These standard models of AI that just reinforce towards a specific goal, they don't work. You need to integrate models that are altruistic, that that remain uncertain about human objective, because we're very changing human beings, ruled by our emotions and have different needs at different times. And that ultimately, yes, use human behavior as an indicator of those directions, but doesn't set a specific goals that it's trying to reinforce in a specific loop. So to answer your questions and try to kind of put another perspective for people who might be listening, yes, right now it feels like we're going in a very problematic directions, because companies that are deploying these systems are deploying systems that are there in a large part trying to reinforce certain objectives that are engagement and profits. That's a problem. It doesn't have your well-being at heart and interest. We need to be orienting the development of these technologies in a directions that we create AI systems that integrate themselves into our lives and take into consideration our needs and context larger than just the interaction that they're having with them, to try to have that net positive. So basically, it's kind of think about this saying that says, like, if you love something, set it free. The AI systems in our relationship needs to be kind of that level of empathetic human. It needs to understand that if the relationship that it's having with you is not beneficial or not bringing you in a beneficial, it needs to either set you free or orient you in other directions that can help you in flourishing.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. I'm so glad you're doing the research that you're doing and you're part of that discourse. I am so very glad, because I think we do have to put our best efforts to mitigate the risks and encourage human flourishing. I'm very excited to have that conversation with you. So I've got a couple more questions. You've been so fascinating. Simon, what do you mean by coevolution?
Yeah, contrary to what people might think, we actually mean it in a sense of evolutionary theories. So we actually mean that as we interact more and more with technology-mediated and especially artificial partners, the technologies and partners that we select and that we prefer and that we use more will influence the technologies that are being developed more and will occupy and populate our environments. Retroactively, the more the different technologies populate our world, it will influence the type of preferences that we have through, yes, our evolutionary background, our sociocultural context, but most importantly, our learned experience with these technologies. For example, experiences of sexual pleasure and social pleasure with these technologies, and that will likely influence our preferences towards other humans. That's a real consideration that I think we need to be taken into account, especially in our development and with children and developing preferences and what kind of preferences. And then this loop will influence the kind of partners that we engage in relationship with and have children with, which will influence the type of humans that populate certain that populate our world. This in a continuous feedback loop that will actually shape the human and the biological and artificial partners that populate our environment. And I think people underestimate that. We talk often about technology like AI porn, as my colleagues and I call it the digital materialization of our fantasy. So it's a unique opportunity to see the depth of human eroticism at large, but we also interact with it and influence its trajectory. And if we let this trajectory just fulfill the needs of a small number of individuals in a very specific way, simply to because companies try to kind of reinforce, they're like, okay, this is working, so we're going to try to make more of that, and that's what populates our world. We're running into a little bit of an optimization problem also in that front. We should be trying to steer a little that co-evolutionary process in a way that really reflects the true depth of human eroticism and provides people with the chances of experiencing a diversity of erotic bodies, of erotic behaviors, of erotic identity in general. So that it actually truly reflects the complexity of human eroticisms for it to be potentially beneficial for enough people.
So, okay, I'm going to go back to sort of like, for a moment. I did another interview with a woman who's a legal scholar in the UK, and she looks at deepfakes and how, young women, their photographs that you can find online are being used. They might be like, at a park with some friends just hanging out, and all of a sudden the deepfake puts them through some AI, and all of a sudden they're naked. And they're doing something, completely without their consent, and completely maybe morphed into something else that they don't even recognize, and they certainly wouldn't maybe give consent to. And so there's that. And then there's also the idea that because of the business model and the algorithms that young people, or especially young people, are going through, there's a tendency to start with maybe like an erotic fantasy that gets some appeal and then gets emphasized, and it becomes the only thing that actually becomes exciting. And as a result, now we were seeing like human sexuality change as a result of those algorithms. The example being choking. Like, I didn't grow up thinking that all the guys wanted to choke all the girls to climax, but that's becoming much more pervasive among the younger generation, that's a thing, to the point now where just like young boys have concussions from hockey playing and football playing, or soccer, American football, now girls are going to the hospital with concussion-like head injuries because of the choking. So I hear you saying that, art, what is that? There's an expression that art replicates life and then life replicates art or something. You're saying the same thing, that the technology is influencing our sexuality and sexuality is influencing technology, but there are clear examples of where things are really going wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. There's plenty of scenarios right now, or where this is the influence of these technologies or these representations and images, the access to very powerful tools to, for example, modify images, creates an epidemic of deepfakes that was predicted way before this technology came to market, and no one lifted a finger to actually do anything, or at least enough. And you're actually referring to some of the work when it comes to choking to one of my colleagues also at Indiana University on this particular topic. What happened? Why is this on the rise? And there's a lot of media attention also that went into why this became more popular. But I think people also need to kind of realize that this technology is not only deployed in a very fast pace it's not deployed in a vacuum. It's deployed in an environment where there's no comprehensive sex education. We debate in universities and in schools and at different levels of governments that people should receive science-based, evidence-based, comprehensive sex education that is adapted to their level of their age and their level of education. Through we're having trouble just getting the right information about intimacy and sexuality. So of course, if you kind of put technology on top of that with all the fears, you deploy it in a morally
vacuous,
more and more polarized environments that is uneducated about their own bodies, their sexualities, about behaviors, about consent, about these things. What do you expect? What do you expect is going to happen? I think we're really quick at pointing technology and really slow in general at saying like, who's developing this technology and in which context is it being deployed? I think there's a lot of people who are have a really good motivation to be like, let's focus on the fact that the technology is available. There's plenty of technology that we're passing laws, that we're protecting, that there's plenty of technology that we should be trying to eliminate or develop countermeasures to try to moderate the content. We're doing that. Everyone now, thank God, is waking up to what we've created and trying to kind of react to it. But I think we're still not also structurally influencing our culture and education in any meaningful way. I think we're doing in certain regions of the world. We're fortunate here in Quebec and Canada, more than in many other places. But just think about what's happening in the US, and then think about the rest of the world. What kind of level of education and information people are receiving about their sexuality and how to discover and how to communicate your desire and pleasure and develop. It's non-existent. So what becomes the tools? Because kids are interested in sex. They want to know about sex. They're seeking information about it. Where are they learning this? TV shows, podcasts, and porn. Like they're seeking this information somewhere. Feed them something that is evidence-based and comprehensive and inclusive for everyone. And let's see where that takes us. Because right now, I think a society that's just left to be educated without porn. Porn has plenty of advantage, but porn is entertainment. Would you be taking like advice about science in a Star Wars movie? Like, just of course not. It's sex education. Comprehensive sex education is as important as math and French and English and science. You need to be teaching it. It's about teaching how people can become decent human beings for themselves and each other. How is this a debate?
Right. That's a great mic drop moment. I also want to circle back to something earlier when you were talking about certain contexts where sex bots could be used in a variety of clinical applications. At what point do you believe there will need to be comprehensive regulations around the protection of agents? Because we treat the machines as though we can exploit them because there's an on and off button. But a lot of people, I mean, I spoke to a transhumanist who believes that, AI is going to be conscious, and there's already people looking at how are we going to protect not the human rights, but the AI rights, of these non-human entities. What do you think about all that?
Yeah. Consciousness, right? The questions of consciousness and sentience is brought up on a regular basis. I would say, first of all, it's not my area of expertise. I think if we are able to demonstrate that we've created certain levels of systems that have a certain form of agency and sentience or even cognition, doesn't mean that they're feeling pain or that there's a moral imperative to protect them. But if they are able to think or feel in some ways, and that we have indication of it, because I understand why it keeps happening. We know consciousness is a possibility at the material level. We have it. We know other non-human animals have it, and that there's a gradient. So we know it's possible to, with a certain amount of matter and organizations and energy, we're able to create consciousness in some way. There's no debate about that. Whether we're creating it or creating something that we're not able to understand, I don't know. Very difficult to establish. What I will say about this is that, for example, if we created artificial partners that are able to be therapists or help in clinical settings, we don't necessarily have to imbue them with the qualities potentially from which consciousness would emerge. It could be potentially very good at interacting and having a certain levels of agency and capability to act in or on our world to try to help people in their clinical settings. For example, I mean, in the lab with Dr. David Lafortune and Valérie Lapointe, we are developing VR environments that are used for exposures to sexual stimuli, progressive exposure to sexual stimuli for people who have sexual aversions. We are also developing these eventually for the future for erectile dysfunctions. It doesn't require a very complex sentient system to provide these gradients of sexual stimuli and go through the process. People are going to their therapist right now to do some certain forms of exposure therapy for arachnophobia, for altitude, for agoraphobia, and stuff like that. It doesn't require another agent or sentient being to do some of these exercises. So I think we need to ask our question, what's the plus value? Anyway, depending on the context, do we actually need a technology that is at consciousness or AGN or human level intelligence, however you want to call it? We just need a system or systems that is better than humans at a certain number of tasks, and they are. I'm not able to calculate as fast and do all kinds of tasks as fast as ChatGPT nowadays. So whether they need rights or not, I think as we approach more complex systems, we should potentially use a precautionary aspect, depending on what we're creating and the architecture of some of these systems. Potentially we'll have to, and potentially we should protect them out of extended empathy. I think our circle of empathy is extending more and more to animals, to the environments, to the possibility of cognition that is different than us. I think we have to kind of accept that we don't know that, and if we don't know, it might be worth this time potentially getting it right, trying to be more cautious at the beginning rather than saying like, oh, well, now that we've proved that these technologies are thinking and feeling in a certain way or experiencing like, oh, sorry, our bad. Now you have rights afterwards. So I'm more on the side of like, depending on the complexity of the system, trying to figure out if there should be potential status. And again, that being said, there's different legal status for different things. For example, lakes and forests can have protected status on the legal side that doesn't necessarily grant them human rights, but it grants them certain forms of protection. Potentially, there's another kind of protections and legal rights that we could create that is more adapted to artificial intelligence.
Well, it's all fascinating. And you've certainly, I have Esther Perel, artificial intimacy, kind of in my head when I think about all of this. And you've provided a counterbalance. I really have appreciated everything you've brought forward in this conversation. I imagine that there are some people who are listening or watching that are like, oh, I wish she had asked this. And if that's the case, I hope that they'll, add a little comment so that maybe, we will return to a part 2 sometime down the road. But I have my last question, but before I do ask that, is there anything that you want to share or want to bring up that we haven't already discussed?
Yeah, actually, there's one point that I would really like if that listener understand is, for example, that people like me and researchers who are trying to put forward that there's potential benefits of these technologies are acutely aware that it's being deployed in a very unethical manner. And it's becoming more and more difficult with everything that's happening to defend a more nuanced position when it comes to the integration of technology and especially artificial intelligence into our life. But it is so needed. We really need to be careful of throwing the baby with the bathwater. This is the most consequential technologies that we will potentially ever create. And it has a huge potential to improve people's lives, but only if we try to figure out a way to mitigate some of its risks. And we try to force companies and actors who are developing these systems to demonstrate their net positive and the good that they put and the beneficial aspects of these technologies, how they are helping individuals and collective well-being. And that's not an imperative that is actually just about artificial intelligence. It's about any companies that is developing any product. There should be an imperative to demonstrate how is it benefiting individuals in society, not just your pockets. So I would really encourage people to be a bit more nuanced, a bit more lean in a very polarized environment fueled by fear and misunderstanding of human sexuality, that it's not because there's bad actors or people who are kind of misdeploying these technologies and misusing it, that it actually is the problem of the technology itself. There's a huge potential to do good, but we're not bystanders. Okay, we are the ones who are influencing this technological development, and we are the ones who are choosing how we regulate it and how we use it in our life. So it's not something that we just are on the receiving of, end of. It's something that we can influence and we can decide what to do with.
Ah, I almost have goosebumps under my turtleneck sweater. Simon, thank you so much for the time. The last question I ask of all my guests, and have been for years, despite whatever the topic is the day, is about empathy. And I wonder if you could share a story from your life about a time that you can remember when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you.
I'm on the receiving end of empathy every day. I have an amazing partner who's been supportive throughout my career and PhD, and we have an amazing relationship. I'm on the receiving end of empathy every day. So I have to mention her. She's fantastic, and I don't know. I wish everyone was that lucky to have someone like this in their life. But if I also think about something very specific, and she was part of it. I remember at the end of my PhD, I was really burnt out. You're really burnt out, and you're in the transition that you're burnt out from 6 years of intense work. You've just defended. Your battery is beyond low. You're on a mask for a period of time, and I was starting my postdoc in this transition, and there was stress with some paperwork and then these things. And it just, at that moment, it became really stressful and difficult. And I was really lucky to have a good network of people around me. I'm really surrounded by fantastic human beings. I had people like Laurie Brotto, I had David Lafortune, I had Dave, my long-term colleague, Maria. I was surrounded by people who just and Justin Garcia. I'm really, really very lucky to have an amazing network of people who just understood the situation, understood at that particular, for a few weeks, that moment, what I needed, the space, and they were there to help and provide me with resources to deal with some of the paperwork and stress, and just take a time and take a breather and give me what I needed at that particular moment. And it really made me realize how lucky I was as a person and how fortunate I was, and what that level of safety net actually your network is around you. And they gave me the space to breathe at that moment. And I think these actions, spoke louder than words. You know that someone is demonstrating empathy, not just when they say they're demonstrating empathy, like large language models, and it's like that you care, but just by their actions in everyday life, it just speaks much louder than words. And I'm fortunate with my partner and my network to have that kind of people around me, and it means everything. It means the world. It creates that sense of safety and well-being that is very difficult to describe.
And if you'll indulge this observation, I've been asking that question probably more than 200 guests over the last 5 or 6 years. And it has never occurred to me until this moment, this conversation, that when I ask this question, no one has ever felt a sense of gratitude for empathy from a machine of any sort. It has always come from a human being. So there is something that you said earlier, that despite whatever value those machines can offer, even if they're technically superior, we still tend to appreciate that human touch to things. So that's a sweet way to end this conversation. And I'm grateful that you have a partner and colleagues that are so supportive in your life, Simon.
Yeah, me too. Very lucky. So if they're listening, you know who you are, and you know I love you.
Wonderful. Well, listen, I'm so grateful for the time we spent together, and I will include a lot of things in the show notes, including the clip from you and your colleague Maria on the Daily Show. It's worth a good laugh. And onwards and upwards with your important research and contributions to this discourse.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this conversation or found it illuminating, I hope you'll check out the other episodes from this series devoted to empathy in the age of AI. And if you know someone who would enjoy the show, I hope you'll pass it along. Before you go, please hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next week.